that was accepted last month by RDA. So the purpose of this session is really to kick off the revived group, to get a sense of what the challenges are that people would like to work on, and also to get an overview both of the individual national data services that the three co-chairs work for, as well as what a national profile for this group might look like using the GORC international model. So Bernard, over to you to talk about the goals of the revised group.
Well, I will do this without a presentation, and I guess you can follow the link if you want to see that in written. But as Andrew just said, we would, in essence, focus on three approaches. One, I guess you could head with exchange. So we would like to provide a forum to exchange experiences. What makes national data services tick? How can national data services be set up? How can we learn from each other and maybe learn on what things work and under which conditions and which probably don't? The second point, as Andrew also already mentioned, we think that leveraging GORC would help this group to have a systematic approach to compare national data services based on the elements that GORC proposes, and thus to help us draw the right lessons. And the final point is that this group would like to point out and develop the perspective on which value national data services provide, and potentially come up also with a publication that illustrates the value of RDA for the national data services. So this is a rough sketch on what we are probably going to do. But first, I guess we need to lay some groundwork, and this is why we're here today.
Okay, thank you. So what I would now like to do is start the next section, which is we're trying to combine two things, I guess, here. So one is we are trying to give you a quick overview of the model that we're proposing to use in part for our work, but also to give you a sense of the kinds of organizations that we work for. And so that set of slides is, come on, open the set of slides. So let me just share my screen. And in fact, maybe for the benefit of Natalie and Bernard, if you want to use me as a remote mouse rather than switching between presenters, you can just say next slide and I'll move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so that.
Yep, it's there.
Okay, so for those of you that have missed the saturation marketing campaign for the Global Open Research Commons Essential Elements, it's a set of essential elements represented as hexagons. Some of this will be picked up by CJ, but very briefly, the blue hexagons, sorry, the mid-blue hexagons across the bottom are the more technical elements of a commons. The white hexagons across the top are the more social elements of a commons. You remember that RDA is building socio-technical bridges. So this is both social and technical aspects. And at the center are standards, and as we'll probably now say, standards and conventions, de facto and de jure standards. And we're going to use this as a way of structuring information about the three different commons that we work for. So I work for the Australian Research Data Commons, who are also, as you will have heard in the opening plenary, hosts for International Data Week in October in Brisbane. Please come to the next face-to-face plenary. Our organisation has as its goal providing Australian researchers with competitive advantage through data, and we do this through 4 different programs of work. I should explain, by the way, what's going to happen is each of the 3 co-chairs will provide a brief overview of their organization and then pick up 3 of the hexagons. So this is really just giving you a sense of the kinds of things that my organization does in terms of national data services. We provide a number of different thematically themed research data commons. For those of you familiar with the NFDI in Germany, this is a little like the NFDI discipline consortia. We run a national research cloud compute platform. We provide a number of services that we call national information infrastructure, discovery, persistent identifier, vocabularies, interoperability, and we have a significant investment in digital research infrastructure skills. And we do all of this in collaboration with our partners. So sustainability, the first of the hexagons for the commons I work for. So we are funded through the Australian Commonwealth Government. Australia is a federal system. We have states and a Commonwealth, a little bit like the German or the Canadian federated systems, with all of the delights associated with that. We are seeking to, so even though we have funding through to mid-2028, we're very aware of the need for sustainability in our services. And so in terms of the services we provide, we try and use existing standards as far as possible. And when we invest with other organizations, we require co-investment. So it's not just us providing the money, they need to also co-invest, usually at least on a one-to-one basis. So that if we finish in mid-2028, which I think is highly unlikely, there'll be other organizations that will have already invested and be motivated to continue. In terms of expertise, we think of sustainability in terms of ongoing upskilling of the workforce across the organization. And we also seek to provide an attractive workplace so that we retain staff. And we have very low staff turnover, which I think is probably a good indicator there. And in terms of the infrastructure we build, we're trying to use industry good practice and to avoid doing too much wheel reinvention on the path to sustainability. Research objects was the second hexagon that I want to talk about for my commons. So as you might imagine from the name, the Australian Research Data Commons, we are primarily focused on data. However, it's important to point out that we don't store the data ourselves. We made a decision a long time ago, in fact, in a preceding organization, that we would rely on other data stores. So we draw on a range of existing repositories, both institutional and the discipline repositories are both national and international. We do, however, provide a discovery service over the top of that. And we have this thing called Research Data Australia that lets you discover data collections and research activities, primarily from the 2 major Commonwealth granting organisations. And you can also discover services and tools. But it's important to note that these are data-centric. So we don't, for instance, run a standalone software registry, but we link to software where it's associated with data. In terms of standards, as I've already said, the GORC model thinks of standards both as ones that are formally defined and ones that are conventions within disciplines. We seek to use existing standards when we develop our services, and certainly for those thematically focused research data commons, we seek to use relevant discipline standards as well, because that's what those disciplines have decided works for them. We have done some standardization work or engaged with some real, in quotes, ISO standards. So Research Data Australia, that discovery service that I talked about, is based on the catchily named ISO 2146-2010 registry standard. And we have also ourselves standardized a thing called the Research Activity Identifier, which is receiving quite a lot of pickup in Europe as ISO standard 23527. So we're both consumers of standards and also creator of standards, if I can put it like that, as well as adopters of discipline standards. Okay, next, Bernhard.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So I will give you first a brief overview of the NFDI, the German National Research Data Infrastructure. and then have a closer look at engagement, governance, and services and tools within NFDI as my 3 hexagons. NFDI, while it sort of feels young, is already in its 5th year. It was founded in 2020, and like Andrew's organization, has funding until 28, and is currently under review for sort of assessing its long-term funding perspective. Currently receives 85 million euros a year. It doesn't have quite as catchy a sort of mission as to provide sort of well, the headway for researchers, but it's a bit more prosaic. NFDI wants to sees data as a common good for excellent research, and it stresses that it is organized by the scientific community in Germany. By the way, why it has the national in its name, it is thought as an international entity to cooperate across borders. So that was sort of the name owes to political necessities in this other federal system. Well, as I said, we are currently, while still building up this whole thing under evaluation in a very sort of intensive endeavor to try to assess how worthy NFDI is for long-term funding. So with this, I would like, Andrew, please switch to the next slide. I would like to focus on engagement. So NFDI likes to consider itself as a bottom-up initiative. It is built up of representatives from 26 disciplines or methodological domains, and those are organized in so-called consortia. These consortia consist of research producing organizations, so this is mainly universities and some other sort of largely publicly funded research organizations. And on the other hand, infrastructure providers, which of course also have various organization and funding sources. So these 26 disciplines range from astronomy to dance data. So there is indeed people recording dance moves and making this data reanalyzable sort of on the cultural side. And sort of this kind of illustrates the variety of data that NFDI is sort of dealing with. And sort of to give you a sense of quantity here, the NFDI for Earth covers Earth system sciences and has about 90 institutional members. So multiply this by 26, which is slightly wrong, obviously, because there's an overlap in institutional membership, but you kind of get an impression of how many institutions, both big and small, are organized in this network. Each consortium offers or has been constructed around a community-specific work program and tries to address the data needs of the specific communities, and each consortium also comes up with a specific service portfolio. I will go into a bit more detail on that later. So community engagement is core, and in fact, it is a KPI for which the whole thing is evaluated. Next slide, please, which brings us to governance. So the whole organization is headed by a directorate, but the strategic decisions are made jointly by an assembly of the consortia I just talked about and are made with sort of at least a 2/3 majority, although unanimity is the rule. There is a very strong involvement of the funders in all governance structures, especially in the board of trustees, sometimes also touching upon operational issues. So there is a huge interest from the funding side in all sorts of aspects. An interesting element, which actually kind of resembles RDA, is that the so-called sections in NFDI are a cross-cutting element in the governance structure, and they link those individual 26 domains across topics like metadata, like technical services, or like training activities. So this is how we are trying to consolidate the different inputs from the various domains and also work towards standardizing processes. Well, I guess with this, I can switch to the last slide. So this gives you sort of two different categories of services we are thinking in. On top are the so-called basic services, of which there are currently 8. Those are services that span the whole NFDI, so are covering the whole national data service. And the examples I picked here are, I guess, on the classic side, a standardized logged in and a Jupyter-based compute environment, which is currently under development. But there are also some more, well, they're not exotic, but there's a DMP, so data management plan service, which tries to provide templates for each domain, but sort of under a joint and a common technical environment. And there's also in the area of training a service that will come up with sort of minimum standards or is currently developing minimum standards for RDM competences in various areas. And on the other hand, we have domain-specific services. This is sort of a bit of a surprise for everybody was when it turned out in a survey recently that apparently there are more than 600 of those, but there's a substantially smaller number of viable services. And just to come up with a few examples, actually most consortia and most domains have established RDM help desks, so not technical help desks, but help desks that help researchers address RDM problems. Beyond that, for example, in the material sciences, there is a service suite called Nomad, which allows you sort of to, from everything, taking measurement data from a diverse set of instruments in, and also then cleaning up and publishing the data. There is a very huge number of repositories, Pangaea in the environmental sciences, and some research data centers for administrative and survey data, which is actually from the domain that I'm coming from. Also, I think worth mentioning is a data portal for genome data, which has just recently gone online. So this is just a snapshot, and with this, I hand over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Bernhard. Okay, this is the last of the National Data Services presentations, and I'm going to switch a little bit here because the first two examples were quite broad, like many different disciplines and lots of different services. The one that I lead has a much sort of a much tighter focus, even though it is also multidisciplinary. So I'll go into that. And I guess the point of this is to show that we already understand there are quite widely varying definitions of what constitutes a national data service. And we thought that, there are 9 different, are they hexagons? Shapes. 9 different pieces in the GORC model. So we would each show how we can speak to a few of them. So I'll do the remaining 3 that my colleagues have not yet covered. So mine is called the Canadian Research Data Center Network. We are celebrating our 25th birthday this year, so actually have been around for quite a long period of time, established in 2000. And essentially what we are is a national research infrastructure for quantitative research in social sciences and population health. So that sounds like a much more narrow focus than my colleagues, but in fact, there's a lot of social sciences. And so we cover them, but economy, epidemiology, and sociology are amongst the highest in terms of the disciplines of users. We are set up as one of 19 funded major science initiatives in Canada, and that has to do with how one of the funding agencies funds research infrastructures. And what we do is support an ongoing partnership between we're up to 45 Canadian universities and Statistics Canada. So all of the data that we make available through this research infrastructure is, I will say, stewarded by Statistics Canada. It's not always their data in origin, but at this point, they are those that steward it. We're jointly funded by 3 national research funders. So it's the Canada Foundation for Innovation, which funds these MSIs, but also the social science one and the health one. And like my colleagues, we are on a cycle of funding as well from 2023 to 2029. Our annual budget is around 12 million. So this is, again, a lot smaller, which makes sense for the size. And we are hosted by McMaster University. So while we are a national network, we do have our place at one university that where all of the staff reside. And on the left side there, you can see the kinds of data sources by theme. We have lots of different diagrams to break down what you can see, but I think there's about 300 different data sets in CRDCN at this point. The census is the biggest one. It's not the largest in terms of size, but it's the kind of most famous and often quite popular one. We have around 2,500 researchers working in the infrastructure at any one time on about 1,500 projects. And there's a bit of a snapshot. This was taken a few months ago of the breakdown. So quite a few people producing their doctorates out of this work. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you, Andrew. So I will speak to the human capacity in CRDCN. If you look at the GORC model, you'll see that there are different ways of defining the human capacity. It's supporting the operation of the infrastructure, but also helping those that use it. So different kinds of humans involved. We have a quite small central staff that manages a new infrastructure that we're building. I think I speak to this somewhere else in the slides. Financial administration, building and support for researcher communities, training for users, knowledge mobilization. So a lot of the research that comes out of our network has direct policy implications. So we try to get that into the hands of policymakers. Training is developed, delivered, and evaluated often in collaboration by the network. And there are a variety of topics, but navigating big or new data sets is quite popular. How to use different software applications. We're working now to really build in more around reproducibility and fair practices into the network. In terms of what's available, there's documentation, there are code books. Their availability varies quite a bit, though. See the point before that we're working on. And researchers often work very closely, so in terms of human capacity, with Statistics Canada analysts that are based in the research data centers. So when we look at the humans involved, there's quite a lot of different players, and they work for different organizations as part of this network. And the analysts themselves have opportunities for development of their capacity within the work that they do. Okay, next slide, next section of the GORC, please. Thank you. All right, this is fun. I chose this one. I said to my colleagues, I want to talk about this one because we have a lot of rules. And I came from those, for those of you who know me from earlier, I was in a cultural heritage repository, humanities and social sciences in Ireland, where what we were focusing on all the time was trying to open everything up. Well, this sure is different. Not in Kansas anymore. CRDCN facilitates access to the data in the RDCs for academic researchers. So I have to state that first, because there are other ways you can get at this data if you're government or if you're coming from industry. And that's done through a different wing of Statistics Canada. So we're taking care of all of the RPO, I guess, based researchers, research performing organizations. Canadian higher education institutions are eligible to join the network. I call it a network, a research infrastructure. Network's in the title, but I mean the same thing. Eligible to join as collaborating institutions. And then they can avail of funding that helps support this work if they're part of CRDCN. So your university has to be part of it. And then the researchers that are part of those universities that are part of the network have to submit a proposal to demonstrate what data sets they require and why they require the granularity of microdata to complete their studies. For those of you who don't know what microdata means, it's the very granular person level data. It's still anonymized, but you can get right down to individuals in terms of your analysis as opposed to aggregated data. So that has to be put through. Researchers then undergo security checks, which includes police checks. I'm trying to do this myself so I can actually see the data in the organization that I lead. But it takes a lot of time because now I need a police check in 2 countries after having lived in Ireland for a long time. So you undergo security checks, you complete training, you affirm an oath of secrecy, and become what is called a deemed employee of Statistics Canada. So you're kind of like you work for them before you are granted access to the data. And then once you do all your work and all of the analysis and regressions, and you have the tables that you want to release and publish a paper on, they have to be vetted by Statistics Canada analysts, not by CRDCN staff. So this partnership with StatsCan is very key and central before the results can be released. And this is to ensure that researchers aren't releasing anything that could be de-identified. So security, privacy, absolutely top level concerns within this national data service. The costs are covered by CRDCN with cash contributions from national research funders, from universities as well, and in-kind contributions from Statistics Canada and the universities. Okay, so those are just a very highlight of those aspects of the rules of participation. So you can flip the slide, please, to my last little bit of GORC. Okay, in terms of compute storage, and this used to be called ICT, I think, in the GORC model. It still is in the most recent one, but data through CRDCN has historically been delivered through a secure tunnel from Statistics Canada to servers at each of the universities. So every university had their own dedicated secure room with cameras and passcodes to get in, and you couldn't be there without an analyst and all the rest at the universities. And the presence of the analyst dictated the open hours. So very high level security again, once you've gone through all of those checks. But we are now building, and we're in fact, well, not building, we finished building it. We are currently in the early stages of launching something called the Virtual Research Data Center. So this is, this centralizes all of the data storage and compute power, makes it better, makes it more in a couple of different hubs in the country. And then the data gets delivered to RDCs via thin clients, which is a technology I won't bother getting into, and also remotely to authorized workstations. So this is an absolutely massive change because we went from, you've got to get in the room and the room is partly what's providing the security to cybersecurity concerns and authentication and all of that sort of thing. Our data provider, which is Stats Canada, does the authentication control in the system, even though we built and are operating the infrastructure. So even the infrastructure in terms of responsibilities and access controls is shared, quite complex. We will allocate compute power through a determined process. And there are tools that are provided in the platform to do the analysis. So you can't take the data out, do the work and do something else with it. You got to do everything within this national data service platform. So that things like R and Stata and Python have to be installed within the folders that the researchers are working in. But it'll enable new possibilities for people to collaborate across the country, which they couldn't do before because their data was on a server in the one university. Okay, is that my final slide, or did I have a sum up? Can't remember. Let's see. Oh no, I'm done. Okay, so that's what we are. I've been there for 2 years. It took me that long to understand it. So, oh, but you had some questions up.
But before we do the questions, we need
Yeah.
to give CJ a chance to
Oh,
talk to
right.
us about what a national profile might look like.
Right. Thanks. CJ, you got your own slides, right? Okay.
A reminder for people that the slides are linked, so you don't need to frantically take notes unless you really want to. Okay, looks good.
Okay, and there I found the unmute button. Great. Excellent. And I will say that, Natalie, thank you so much for that coverage. I knew a little bit about NFDI and about ARDC, but I did not know a whole lot about CRDCN, despite living in Canada. So I really appreciate that in particular. So yeah, thanks for having me. I'm, as Andrew kind of said before, I'm a co-chair for the GORC groups, the interest group and the International Implementation Working Group. And through some of the last few plenaries, especially with the NDS-IG co-chairs and then also Francoise, I think in particular, kind of highlighted that there were areas that were of interest for us to work on together. And so I'm happy to talk about them with you today. Andrew's already kind of introduced the model, and so have Bernard and Natalie. And so just pointing out that the essential elements, you can learn more about them through the interest group typology and definitions. And the reason why I bring this up again is because there was an international model working group, which is now complete, which had outputs and recommendations that lived kind of within on top of that essential element structure. So some of those things have been brought up so far, but I want to highlight that the model has been created. It was a supporting output in 2023 and is now a recommendation as of 2024, a few months ago. And there was a narrative report that came out with that as well. The model is intended to be non-prescriptive, and it was intended to answer this, not what is a commons per se, but what are a set of considerations a commons might have within each of these essential elements to then figure out what do they do next and become part of this global open research commons. So the model kind of dug down into all of these considerations. There's a ton of entities, categories, and subcategories, as well as characteristics for each of those items in the model that kind of dive into what might you consider as your building. The report's easier to look at if you haven't looked at the model before. So if you haven't seen this, please go look at the report first and then come back to the very large spreadsheet, which is the model. The International Model Working Group is complete. We've now moved on to GORC 2, or the International Implementations Working Group. And this is the group that I think we're going to be able to have a lot of complementary work and collaboration with the National Data Services Interest Group. So very quickly kind of going over what some of the deliverables are, we really want to look at implementations of the model. So not just what a commons might consider, but how would they do it, which is kind of a big thing. So some of the pieces that were part of that was identifying types of commons, creating a National Data Services Commons profile, as well as looking at profiles of individual commons. So specifically a profile of ARDC, or specifically a profile of NFDI, and so on and so forth. We wanted to improve navigation, which would be format improvements, model documentation, taking thematic slices like the FAIR principles, for example, and then also mapping between frameworks that are already in use in these commons. And then lastly, of course, keeping up with literature analysis. The outputs that are intended to come out of these deliverables is to provide a common language, to provide examples of what implementation might look like, and to showcase where existing frameworks and models have gaps, connect together, and can complement each other. And so for this group in particular, our first deliverable, and there's a reason why this was first, and it's because we know this is really important. Implementations of the model are really key. And what this does is it's going to provide examples of what implementations of commons can be moving forward. So really diving into what are best practices to move towards global interoperability. So the two that I really want to highlight today, and I think are going to be really interesting for discussion, are commons types, which is our first deliverable. And this kind of, I think, plays into this general question for this group of what is a national commons or a national data service? Are they the same? Are they different? And how do we define them? And I don't have the answer to that. That's the question. So we really want to work together on this, and we want to make sure that we're aware of each other's work, as well as aligning our definitions, because there's not really a point in having a ton of non-connected vocabularies in RDA, right? Let's just make sure that we are using the same words for the same thing. A profile, however, would be a class of GORC implementation profiles. And this would say, how would you develop a national data service? Or how might you expand one, or how might you improve upon one that exists? So we're answering two different kinds of questions there. And this one is really what we want to create a task force between our two groups to answer. So quickly looking at commons types, there is a lot of text analysis behind this. It did come from the speaker series in the International Model Working Group, but this work has not been publicized. So we're getting this first sneak peek even before our own session in this session today on commons types. And if we have time, I can definitely show you some of the analysis we have on this. There is some nice graphics and stuff that went with it, but we didn't have time to cover it in the International Model Working Group, unfortunately. This will, however, be the basis of a lot of our outputs moving forward into GORC 2. And we really want to get these confirmed before the end of May so that we can actually start working on these other things like profiles. So there's 5 dimensions. There's maturity, how old it is basically, weight class, which is kind of the breadth of services that you're offering, your service level, which is how much are you doing in-house developed by your own staff versus how much are you aggregating from outside. Reach, so who is your actual community, your intended community, and approach, which would be infrastructure first or community first, or together, because those are the last 2 are multifaceted. So then a commons type isn't one of these dimensions. It's a singular point across a 5-dimensional space. So you would have one choice or one combination of facets between all 5 of these dimensions to then come up with a type of a commons. And so again, as Natalie, I think, had said earlier, there's more than one kind of national data service, and that's exactly what these get into, because I would kind of consider holding the reach dimension fixed is what gives us these national commons or these national data national data services. So for reach, if you hold it steady at national or discipline specific and national, it's held fixed. You then have examples of maturity of young, middle-aged, or mature. I'm not going to read out all the examples. They're there on the slides and you can see them and have a look at them and argue with me about it. You can also have a weight class of lightweight, middleweight, and heavyweight. So again, kind of thinking about the human capacity element is what really goes into weight class. Service level can be dispersed, collected, or centralized. So are you offering some things yourself, or you're offering most things yourself? Or researchers have very little need to go elsewhere for those services, or most of your services are offered by your staff and not an external body. And approach, community first, infrastructure first, and community plus infrastructure. And unsurprisingly, most commons that we saw were community and infrastructure first. So again, this is a preliminary analysis. It has not been vetted with any of these commons that I have listed here, but I think this is of interest for this group. And so that's the commons type that would define the level of the profiles. The profiles themselves are implementation maps of the GORC model for that specific class. So holding the reach dimension fixed, you have a ton of other types of commons that fall under that are national commons or are national data services. So they need implementation maps to help define them and tell them how they use the model, or how they can use the model. And so this could include elevating items, removing other items from the model that aren't important, adding more granularity to some, or whole new ideas that are relevant for national data services that weren't included in the model in the first place, as well as saying, is there a general procedure for how you might implement those for a national data service? And then in addition to that, kind of leaning into further into our deliverables, which would be individual instances, individual profiles for specific commons. So not just a general idea or best practice that's listed, but then this is specifically how the ARDC does it. This is a link to the website. This is a link to their strategic plan where they showcase this, for example. And then so that's how this national data service one would go. That's how profiles are made in general, but you would essentially take this and apply it to a national data service and say, how is this related to a national data service or a national commons in each instance? What needs to be elevated or downvoted, maybe made more granular, made less granular? You would maybe look at the consideration level of each item in the model, or some things that are listed as core, not as relevant for national data services, and there would be made optional. And then the how, of course, is really key. And so with that, that's the 2 areas that I see where our work really overlaps. And it is in both of our statements of work to have a task force between our groups to kind of develop that class of profiles. If you're interested in hearing more, and especially if you want to comment on the commons types, that's going to be the main topic of our breakout session in breakout 7. So excited for this discussion, but also come to our breakout session too, please.
Thank you.
Okay, that's excellent. And amazingly, Natalie, we are back on time. I don't quite understand how this is possible, but we're back on schedule for the agenda. So well done to all of us. Natalie, do you want the question slide back up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can find it, but yeah, why don't we just share it so everybody can read it?
Yep. Let's need to find the right link. Just bear with me while I go looking for it. This should not be so difficult.
Sure. I mean,
It was right there.
I have it handy if you want.
No, I finally found it. Sorry, it was right down the bottom of the list, of course. All right.
Okay, hold on. No, just a sec, I have to. Right. Okay. So, the intention that we had was to try to get through that relatively quickly. And then to spend the rest of the time in discussion with the group on these are the three questions. I mean, if we get through them quickly, we can see if there are any others. Now, my friend Françoise cautioned against this first question, I believe. How do we want to define national data service? I believe you said that we could spend the entire time discussing this. So we want to be careful not to do that entirely, but we have given you some concept of different ways that we look at these things. I only joined this group in Costa Rica, and I joined it because I thought, does what I do count as a national data service if we've got someone like ARDC in the room? Because they're just really different kinds of things, right? I think we, as the co-chairs, have decided the answer is yes, unless I'm about to be kicked out of the Zoom room for the 6th time today. Yeah, I think, any thoughts about the need for any parameters, the need to not put parameters, if there's any very core definition, are there things that don't fit within here, and we should say, oh, that you're really doing something else, it's not a national data service.
Okay.
Some of the definitions of
Natalie,
the title. Yeah.
before we dive into that, I apparently can't share my screen and take notes at the same time. So do you mind if I stop the screen sharing? The questions
that's
are in the
fine.
collaborative notes document.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay. So
Okay, I'm on note taking.
Françoise has taken her mute off. You could have put up your hand, but I think, were you going to say something, Françoise? Yeah, there you go. I don't hear you talking, Françoise, but
Yes, no,
Oh.
I missed the fact that you gave me the floor.
sorry.
So now I understand. As you said, I am not so fond of spending lots of time defining something from the start. And but I think that you could have a general pragmatic definition to begin with, and then in particular, when you do the GORC modeling, you will see the elements coming in place. And I think that you will see the diversity of possibilities, because if I think about national data services and I think about my country, France, I have, of course, the National Data Service with the big capitals, which is Recherche Data Gouv. Gilles is here, and other people are here also who are driving that, I mean. But we also have thematic services, and I thought about them listening to you. And I see at least 2 of them, which have a national role, different services, and so overarching role. And so I think the door has to be open, and the diversity of already between NFDI, ARDC, and CRDCN demonstrates that.
Yeah.
So can you have a definition with 2 sentences to start with, and then we see what happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think what others on the call, when you've heard how we've talked through this, are you here representing what you would consider to be a national data service in your context, or are there others that you could speak to? I'm going to call on people. Oh, good. I didn't have to call on her. She put her hand up. Beth.
You're going to target me anyway. All right.
I was, yeah.
I'm here on behalf of the Digital Repository of Ireland, which you are very familiar with, which is a service that does have a national remit. anyone from Ireland and actually across the entire island, so we kind of extend into the UK as well, can deposit with the DRI. So we have previously participated in things representing ourselves and recognizing ourselves as a national level service. Now, we don't set, maybe you'll argue with me on this one, we don't set the national agenda for research data, although we certainly are a voice in that. But we're a part of services that any researcher or research infrastructure can participate and take advantage of across the country. We participated last fall in a Fair Impact grant that was aimed at connecting national level initiatives across Europe and facilitating conversation and exchange. And we did that in partnership with the National Open Research Forum and with the Higher Education Authority, HEA-NET, the sort of technical side of that. And together as kind of like the three of us can cover over a lot of supports across the country, but none of those organizations really stands alone. We're all pieces of a puzzle. So I would say that Fair Impact also thinks that any organization that can raise its hand and say, we think we're a national service, should maybe be part of that national conversation.
National data. Yeah, thanks. You raised something interesting there because you said we're not at the DRI setting the political agenda. So, but it doesn't, I don't know that then anyone would, I'm not going to debate that. But I don't know that anyone would then say one needs to set the agenda in order to be considered a national data service, right? So
I suppose
yeah.
Yeah, I think of some of those heavyweights that you had in the GORC model, and I think they have the money to really drive where research is going. And maybe when you think of a national data service, you think of something with that level of like kind of power and influence. But you're right. I don't think that necessarily the size of the organization or the amount of money that they have or the number of disciplines that they serve means that they shouldn't be a very valued voice in the conversation around national data services.
We've got lots of action in the chat. Stephanie's saying it could be a continuum along several axes, but the axes may not be fully defined from the start. Francois taking us away from the definition and then back in the Stephanie court. Absolutely. I think some starting points would be good, but I don't see a rigid in out. We may not need to spend much time on this one. Does anyone else have thoughts on this topic about definition?
Sorry, just on the chat, Natalie, it's
Yeah.
a meta thought. We'll make sure that we capture the chat at the end of this and put it at the end of the collaborative notes document. I don't have the ability to take notes of the main conversation and engage with the chat at the same time.
Sure. I think we can, somebody can, one of the hosts I think has to save the chat. I don't have that capacity right now.
Trish, if you could save the chat, that'd be great.
Yes, go ahead. If you're only the first one with your hand up.
Just a quick comment. Maybe we should be clear from the beginning that a national data service doesn't have to be the one and only national data service in a given country. As long as it has a mandate, there could be more than one national data service, I guess. So if we're talking about national, transdisciplinary, or thematic and national, I mean, as long as it has a national mandate, it could, I mean, it's part of the group, and it answers the definition. I think it's quite important because, to be honest, at the very beginning, when we talked about national data service, I kind of imagined like there's one per country and that's it. But it's absolutely not the case. So I mean, it should probably be stated that that bit is quite important, in my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah. I think we have, we have examples of that already here. And there's Mingfeng Wu has said in the chat that, could there actually be national data services within ARDC? So that would be broken down on a thematic basis. A versus the, yeah. I mean, if you look at the way that data stewardship has been discussed from a sort of broad I would say most European open science perspective, a lot of the advice around that is to work within disciplines, right? Because that's where you get the expertise to support the kinds of research that's taking place, domain expertise, as well as the technical. So my guess is national data services would end up most likely being plural and not the, but a series of A's. Go ahead, Francois.
I wonder if to have a kind of mission which is at the national level is not the starting point of a definition, and then the range of a mission can be very different, as we already heard.
Yeah,
But if we say national data service, national has a sense, a meaning somewhere, but maybe it's not so evident because people from Europe may tell you, and EOSC, what do we do with EOSC, which is at the regional level? But for the moment, we may say it's at the national level, and then we see what happens.
yeah.
Or La Referencia, they have a role at the regional level also. But we can start like this and see what happens with the regional and discuss the relationship with the regional level afterwards.
And so how about data? So if we're going to start with national, would you consider an NREN like HANet, you know, that provides the broadband service to the universities and all of that? It's to transfer data, but is that a data service? My gut response would be no, but I'm sure there could be debates around that.
I think I remember many NRENs. Some NRENs have a role which is wider than just providing the network.
Okay.
I remember, I think I heard that in discussions in Europe. So maybe it's in between, and it can be, if you have a gray zone, you can, maybe identifying the gray zone is a good starting point.
Yeah. So there's one. Stephanie said, I think ATM is at the moment. Is that what that acronym means?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, no. Okay. Did you want to step in?
Too lazy to type.
Yeah. Do you want to say do you want to just speak, Stephanie?
Yeah,
Say-
sure. So I was just wondering, so we're talking about national services, but do they, like, what about a discipline-specific service that might cover, you know, a whole region or even more than that, but isn't tied to a specific nation or country? Would that be included or not? And I don't know if it would be useful to include it or not. So
You have
I was
one
just thinking of
example?
that.
Do you have one example?
Um,
Crystallography or something like that? Or
Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. Or yeah,
Protein
I
Data
can't think
Bank
of any.
was
Yeah, yes, thank
Protein
you.
Data
Thank
Bank
you,
was the
Andrew.
example that I was going to go for. Harking back 20 years to my
GBIF
previous
and
projects. So it's a really interesting question, Stephanie. Something like the Protein Data Bank, or indeed even something like Pangea, they have an international remit within a particular discipline, but they're nationally funded. So do we decide whether something is national based on who it offers services to, or based on how it's sustained? And I don't know, and I don't have a position on that. It's another axis.
well, what I mean, I know Bernard's got his hand up, but just to respond to that, Andrew, the question then comes to what the other questions we have on our list of discussion points, I think, which is what are we trying to get out of this, and what are we trying to fulfill by having this group, right? So if you maintain that the main funding or governance structures have to be national for it to be a national data service as opposed to a multinational one or one that has different national inputs, that does narrow the focus in a potentially useful way to discussing the questions around national funding, right? So if that's off the table, then it's a bit broader. Bernard, do you want to?
I was going to head into the same direction. Well, first, I really liked the approach of trying to narrow down the data aspect, and would suggest that a sort of strong operational focus on handling research data. This could probably be a sort of an operational approach towards what data means, so that you don't really need to focus on sort of like the really technical providers that just, you know, send data along if they only have those technical capabilities, right? And the other aspect, I'm also very much with Natalie. I think that the national focus, if it is to help us understand something, then it could be about how to convince certain national policymakers and other stakeholders how services can be set up in a national context, because national contexts are still the dominant and prevailing source of funding and also of regulation. And right, so this would be, I guess, this would be why it pays off to have national in the sort of title, and why there are probably significant differences to regional and sort of truly international infrastructures that deal with other sets of problems.
Yeah, and people are filling in around what you're saying there, Bernard, in the chat. Funding streams is a big consideration. I mean, it seems to me when I read the news every day that the concept of the national is coming back big time. And so, you know, as opposed to the global, which means that questions around data sovereignty are on the table again in a huge way, right? And you know, some of that comes from a kind of protectionist, some comes from a fear of, you know, how the world is currently falling apart. Not to be negative, but I think there's funding, but governance, sovereignty, those things relate to the national too, which they're real. I mean, I certainly would say that's real in the context I'm operating in. You can't get access to the data in CRDCN if you're not physically in the country. You have to be here. You don't have to be Canadian yet. Let's hope it stays that way. But you have to be in the country. So trying to see if Bernard's drinking straight out of a bottle of wine there. It's late in the evening.
It's just mineral water.
Okay. It would be fair. It would be fair if it was wine at whatever time it is, almost 1 a.m. Francois said relationship with national authorities, national community. Yeah. Right. That's national could be a spectrum. Yeah. I think every single one of these words could be spectrumy, which is what we're trying not to entirely kill. Right. I think, these are the other questions that we were hoping to bring to the table, which I think we're already kind of onto, and may help to get us off the topic of definition or help us finalize the topic of what's a good enough definition. What do national data services, those of you that are representing one, and I would say, Beth, like, I can't see any reason why DRI wouldn't be considered a national data service in the context of what we're discussing. You're national, you're dealing with research data, and it is a service. So, yeah, what do NDSs want to get out of this group? What's the value of it, so that we can make sure we develop a plan of work that fits that? But the same question for non-NDS participants. If you're coming from, I'm actually even more curious about that. If you're coming from something you don't think at all is a national data service, how come you're here? Andrew, go ahead.
So, without wishing to trigger CJ's PTSD, before the original International Model Working Group was formed, it called itself the Benchmarking Working Group. See, that's the reaction. That's the reaction I was looking for. Thank you, CJ.
That's how I feel too.
Yeah, and I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to benchmarking for a whole variety of reasons. But some of the ideas around benchmarking, I think, are still useful. And so what I would say is, as someone involved in a national data service, I would like to have a chance to learn from other people, which is, of course, very different to saying we're doing it best, because we're not. Well, we might be on a couple of things, but anyway, I don't want to benchmark ARDC, but I do want to learn from other people about what works in their setting and whether there are things that we could do better in Australia by being exposed to a wider range of approaches. So for me, that would be one of the things, one of the values that we could get out of this group.
Yeah, I echo that completely. I want to steal all the good ideas and share the ones that we think we've developed that are good. You know, no need to reinvent the wheel on these things, because in the end, we are trying to come together on how we do some of this, right? For interoperability purposes. Does anyone have a hand up? Let's just see what's going on in the chat. Françoise said she's coming from an international thematic data service. So we'll come back to why you're interested in the national. Defined by reach. To help Katie saying, oh, hi, Katie. Haven't seen you in a while, to contribute to big picture work in an individual capacity. That's my stove, just so understand the reasons why things are done in a certain way and what could not be transferable. Yeah, so knowledge exchange.
All right, I'll pick up for a second, Natalie. You can go get your
Sure.
oven.
Thanks. I'm just going to take the thing out of the oven.
Okay. I would say that I would be looking to participate in this for the same reasons that I participated in the Fair Impact Grant, where it was an opportunity for services that do have a national remit to figure out how the pieces are being put together in different countries. So where you should be looking to lock in and provide complementary services or point researchers or take advantage of grants and collaborative opportunities, but also to look at other countries at how they've developed and maybe, I guess, situate yourself for your best potential outcome for where you want to see your service go. And having a forum where other national level services are talking about how they fit into the national picture is extremely valuable. We got a lot out of that exchange, and it was just like a teaser for what I want. I wanted more. Basically, like this continuation would be valuable in that I already got some value out of having this kind of forum in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that collaborative opportunities, that's something slightly different than just best practice exchange, and also seeing if there are pieces that could actually be shared. I mean, not to stick too much to the local context, but I noticed that CJ, the Alliance, and in Canada, and Andrew, the ARDC, signed an MOU about how to work together. And I don't know, if there are really concrete steps involved in that, or if it's just a sort of overarching agreement to then be able to determine what the concrete steps are, but that's possibly one pathway, like with what Beth's talking about. Okay.
Do you want me to respond to that, Natalie?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you have anything, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a nice example of a, how can I phrase this? A non-empty MOU, or an MOU that was more than just a signing ceremony and some nice photos. As CJ has quite correctly pointed out in chat, we have an exchange program. So it's an MOU which has a number of annexes. Well, we'll have a number of annexes. And the first annex is an exchange program around a skills focus. So the the Alliance Skills Lead came to Australia last month. The Australian Skills Lead is going to Canada in June. There's another exchange from Canada back to Australia timed for the International Data Week in October. And then a final exchange, Australia going to Canada sometime first quarter of, let's say, of next year. So this is actual real expenditure of money and time, and really seeking to try out different approaches that have worked or been developed in one country, in a different country, to see what we learn from using them in a different setting, and also seeking to exchange what works and what doesn't work. And we're already thinking about how we could extend that model to other aspects of services that we both provide, or that we currently provide, but the Alliance in Canada might wish to provide.
That's interesting, because basically what you just described, Andrew, is what Francoise had written about, what are the shared characteristics, what are specific to one context, what's different, and how can you work on them. Well, that's great to know that it's an agreement with serious weight behind it. Yeah. Anyone else who hasn't sort of said anything yet? What anything you'd like to get out of this? Colleagues, my co-chairs, I don't want to end early and lose our precious time, although I realize it's the middle of the night for half of you on the call here. So any other
But
thoughts?
we do have this last point anyway, right? On the next steps.
We do have a next, yeah, where was that do we have a slide for that?
No, we didn't. And we also have what do non-NDS participants want to gain from this group. So we might just check and see if the people that aren't associated with National Data Services on the call would like to add anything more to that. And then, yes, next steps.
Going twice, okay. I mean, this is not your last opportunity to say anything. Oh, hi, Keith.
Hello.
Right.
Sorry, I've been lurking in the background as I've been commuting across Sydney, which I didn't want to share with you. That was not, it would have been a very lumpy experience. I was just wondering about what the value would be of the exchange between the national data services. I think there is definitely value in exchange between national data services and learning what different data services are doing. I'm just wondering what the sweet spot would be, what the sort of activities would be that would be of value to exchange. And one of the things that's actually just on my desk at present, and I'm about to send out within ARDC, is our FAIR policy. And it's a policy around how do we actually promote FAIR, both within the organization, but also across in our partnerships with other partners across Australia as we're working to build data infrastructure. So I'm not saying that we should just focus on that topic specifically, but I'm just seeing that as an example where I'd be quite interested to see how other national data services have tackled FAIR, because FAIR is wonderful and great, but when you actually need to turn it into practice, how do you do that? And I'm sure there's other topics like that. So, for example, skills building or cloud compute and balancing out the cloud compute offerings versus commercial cloud offerings, things like that. So I'm guessing there should be topics like that that would be of interest. And I was just wondering whether they're just picking off those topics and having a few data services sharing what they're doing and how they're doing that might be of interest. Just a thought.
Yeah, thanks. I think I can see there being a lot of interest in that. I feel like FAIR is talked about in a lot of different ways, but it's a specific context when you're running a data service, right? Although there's different data services.
And Natalie, just picking up on what Keith said, one of the things that we didn't put under next steps is whether we want the interest group to meet between plenaries. And what Keith has just described, picking off some topics, working through maybe a series of short presentations on how different data services have tackled those topics, that might be a useful way to populate a program of meetings between plenaries, noting that we're going to avoid the Northern Hemisphere summer. We're probably not going to have that many meetings between now and International Data Week in October.
Yes. correct? To Stephanie's question.
So I should know that. But did that have any particular concrete things that the group wanted to do? I may have missed that at the start.
Francois?
Sorry, as
Yes.
in were there concrete things listed in the statement of work?
Yes.
Yes, I was going to go to that. I saw that there are several proposed activities, and there is one about RDA value for NDS, and it's the kind of thing I am interested in participating in. And I also know I can participate in eventually in the GORC modeling with the help in particular of all the colleagues from Recherche Data Group to prepare something which could be shared as one of the possible examples. But so maybe it could be good if you send a message asking people to sign up for activities after the meeting. I am not sure, I have not checked how many people you have, but you have all the people who were in the previous group. But this could be sent also to the GORC lists, because there are people who could be interested in these activities.
Thank you. Bernhard?
Well, just also responding to the concrete items or tasks question, in addition to what Françoise just said, I would think, and also regarding sort of this fair policy question, the GORC elements are not exhausted, both in terms of, you know, the breadth of covering all the NDSs present in this room and not present in this room. I guess we could also spend more time sort of looking at how each of our services are tackling, you know, for example, the policies questions that might relate to FAIR and the other things that Natalie earlier illustrated. So getting something out of this along these dimensions might open a lot more learning potential than sort of just, you know, staying on the more broad level.
Andrew, do you want to say something to wrap us up here?
Sure. I believe in YouTube, this is called the outro. I think, I mean, I think it's been, first of all, my thanks to the participants for persisting at the start of the meeting through the, I don't know, the Zoom unbombing. I guess it's unbombing when you get kicked out of a Zoom rather than having people drop in. So thank you for your patience and persistence there. I think this has been a really useful conversation. I'm not going away from this meeting thinking that our job is done and no one wants to revive the NDS interest group. There's clearly lots of things we could do. And so I probably should also, in this context, thank Françoise for her dogged persistence in encouraging us to revive the group. Well done, Françoise. You've created work for all of us, so that's great. And I think there's a lot of possibilities there. I think we have some very concrete things to follow up on. I think we need to, as co-chairs, we need to think about what the meeting schedule would look like between now and October, brackets, International Data Week, close brackets. And work out what in particular we want to achieve between now and then. And clearly, I'll be having follow-up conversations with CJ about how the work we're doing in the Global Open Research Commons International Implementation Working Group will relate to the discussions that we're having here. We have captured, I think, most of the conversation in the collaborative notes document. Yeah, okay, that's a good idea, Bernhard. Okay, so we will we'll copy the chat in and link the chat in so you have a record of the meeting. So Bernard has suggested that we don't waste the Slido. So for those of you in the collaborative notes document, if you could scroll all the way up to the top, there is the introductory section that we propose to use. So if you can click on the Slido link. Let me see if this is actually going to work. I haven't actually logged into that. What do you mean there are no active polls at the moment? I think it was a good idea, Bernard. We might just not try and make this work. No, it's convinced that we don't have any active polls. All right, the Slido was a good idea. It would have been beautiful, but it's fine. So in that case, we'll close. Yeah, I'll put the questions into the collaborative notes. That's a good idea, Stephanie. Once I work out how to log back into Slido, I'll stick the questions in the collaborative notes and people can respond there. It was essentially just where are you from? What role do you play within your organization? And which of the various tortured acronyms provided by Bernhard do you think GORC stands for? Some of them are possibly even improvements on what it really stands for. So we may want to take that as a marketing hint. Yeah, the issue, Stephanie, is that Slido's saying I'm not even logged into it, so I'm not going to battle with their clumsy authentication process. The takeaway for me there is that Mentimeter is much easier to use than Slido for these kinds of things. So there we are. That's your helpful tip for the week. I look forward to seeing a number of you again at subsequent sessions. There's a GORC session midnight my time in a day or so. But there's a range of other things where we're going to be discussing the cluster of issues around this. So thank you for your time and enjoy sleep for those of you in Europe. All of your day for those of you in our part of the world. And yes, thank you, CJ. We hope to see some of you at Breakout 7. And I wish you a productive and enjoyable plenary meeting. Thanks all.